remember when I first learned that there was such a thing as K-pop lore. It was in 2020, mid-pandemic. Like many others in the US, sometime early pandemic, I had discovered K-pop and it was getting me through. I was dancing to K-pop for exercise and watching music videos and behind-the-scenes content for infusions of serotonin and escape. But I hadn't latched on to any particular groups yet. I started watching this show called Road to Kingdom, where different groups who hadn't made it big yet compete with one another to claim the keys to the kingdom.
전쟁의 서막? 드디어 전쟁이 시작됐구나. 패기가 있기 때문에 진짜 이를 갈고 자신 있어요. 왕관은 어차피 우리가 가자!
We got to know the group members and group dynamics as the different groups prepped for each stage or competition, and each stage was epic and performative far beyond my expectations. Stages often embodied a concept or feeling through costume, lyrics, and choreography. At first I was drawn somewhat equally to all the groups and what a set of groups they were. But one group's personalities backstage started to catch my attention. Then we got to the fourth stage, where groups develop their own song and create a concept trailer to go along with it. This is when I was blown away. Out of seemingly nowhere came this.
6 monarchs and their cursed servants waited for a child born on the day of an eclipse. Eventually, the monarchs won the war and protected the child. But, as the monarchs tried to cut the neck of the last marquise, when the red moon comes again, I will come back for the child. Then, the night sky turned red.
Monarchs? A curse? We were dropped right in the middle, and this snippet of story felt so far-reaching and uncontained, like Oneus stepped beyond the bounds of a single performance for a competition show, looming bigger, larger, and reaching out in every direction. The performance itself leaned in more deeply to this sense of far-reaching potential, telling another piece of the story and expanding on the themes in choreography, staging, and costume. Suffice it to say, though Oneus didn't win Road to Kingdom, they won my heart. And off I went to explore other narratives connected to them, like the I Shall Debut series, which tells the story of their formation and early days as a group. What I learned as I caught up with all things Oneus was that the whole vampire monarch thing was part of what K-pop fans and industry term lore, an unfolding story associated with a group, told through music videos, trailers, and other metatextual material.
Meanwhile, Helios grieved the loss of his son, Peathon. His grieving sorrow turned to anger, and that anger soon fell upon the monarchs, who later fled to the darkness.
Oneus's vampire lore stretched across their music videos and their trailer videos. They talked about it in interviews. It pretty clearly informed their choreography. Yet at the same time, there was a great diversity of themes and aesthetics across their music videos. Their vampire narrative allowed them to be vampire monarchs across multiple time periods and in different narrative situations, which I drank up as I caught up on all of their previous work. Forgive the bad vampire pun. They start off as innocent kings turned vampires to protect their people. Then later on they become dormant vampires, refusing to feed off of their people. And after that they accept the necessity of their vampirism and become chaotic vampire lords, and eventually they evolve into sorrowful vampires longing for their past lives and loves. Thus, the vampire lore, as Oneus manifested it specifically, was sort of flexible and elastic enough to allow diversity through many years of their creative work. Only when one of the members left the group and there was a real rupture in that narrative world of 6 vampire monarchs did we have a shift towards a mermaid lore, so a pretty significant genre shift. But at the same time, they were still princes, just mermaid princes, which suggested a connection to their past lore, but sidestepping it as well, almost as if it was a kind of alternative universe where there's only 5 of them, and they're mermaids. But the whole time that I was engaging with Oneus's vampire come mermaid lore, I felt like there was always this sense of this one additional iteration of their vampire world, and that was our world. And that in our world, there could also be these eternal vampire monarchs turned K-pop idols. And so this was sort of one instance of their existence that we happened to be experiencing. Not strictly what one would call a multiverse, but still manifold enough to suggest it to my mind. Retrospectively, perhaps it's not a coincidence that my next encounter with lore was also from a K-pop competition show, and actually the franchise sister show of Road to Kingdom, Queendom. In Queendom, like in Road to Kingdom, K-pop groups battle for the royal title. In this case, I was watching invested in a recently debuted group called Viviz, whose debut single Bop Bop had completely enthralled me. I vaguely knew that the 3 members of Viviz had been part of a larger group that had been disbanded, but I really didn't know anything about their previous group, Gfriend. So when they performed a stage on Queendom that recreated 2 of Gfriend's clearly beloved songs and kept key symbolic moments of the visuals as well as the choreography that involved the 7 members of Gfriend sort of as placeholders, recognizing their absence. Even though I didn't have any of the details, I felt the impact of that lore that I didn't yet know like a punch to the gut, and I wanted to know more. What was it about the clock ticking down, the specific time and date mentioned? What did this position in the choreography mean? It all felt so pregnant with meaning, even if I knew none of the details and could fill in none of the blanks. And so I started looking into Gfriend, and I absolutely fell in love with the storyline. Basically, Gfriend's lore tells the story, and it tells it through fairy tale books as well as video trailers and music videos, of 7 girls who grow up on an island together, somewhat isolated from the world. At their birth, they're given gifts of glass beads, and eventually they each receive individual magical powers from a shimmering lake, or from the tree beside the lake, it's somewhat unclear. Because their magical powers are different, they become jealous of one another and begin to fight. Now what these powers are is somewhat unclear, and fans in various lore videos debate the question. One member can maybe move stuffed animals, another can see through reflections, another can switch bodies with another member. Unha, who happens to be my favorite, can change time. She can turn back time by using these blue butterflies, and every time she does so, her glass bead darkens. As she turns back time, she changes the narrative and the storyline in what an official trailer video calls a butterfly effect.
This is our story of when we ran, our hands clutched tightly together. The unbroken road suddenly split into 2, and there, darkness descended. But we didn't hesitate. We ran towards the blue light.
So here we have a direct invoking of the multiverse, of this notion of our ability to make changes that could forever transform the future, replacing it with another. So this is an embodiment of butterfly effect theory, but with literal butterflies. What's most fascinating to me about this dimension of Gfriend's lore is that in the end, though Unha does succeed in changing the narrative and uniting her friends, she does so at the cost of her own and each other's glass beads. The final music video which Gfriend released, Mago, shows them accepting their darkened beads and their dangerous magical power. The video celebrates their power as witches, thus rejecting moral narratives that frame witches as bad. This is, for me at least, such a satisfying turn in the narrative, brought about by Unha's determination to change time at the cost of her own purity, essentially. Unfortunately, tragically, Gfriend was disbanded abruptly and unexpectedly after the release of the album Walpurgis Nights, and Mago was thus the end of their lore story. It's unfortunate because of course everyone wanted more, but at the same time narratively, I find it a kind of satisfying conclusion. Nonetheless, it leaves the emptiness of the present and future without Gfriend, and leaves us, well me, in the present with the new existence of Vivici separated from the other Gfriend members, who they gestured to in the Queendom stage as an alternate reality in which they are all together. So at this point in my K-pop journey, I began to realize that K-pop lore was everywhere, that almost every group has lore to some degree, whether it be limited to a specific album or more often something that stretches across multiple albums, sometimes coming to an end and allowing a new story to pick up after a period of years, other times continuing through the lengths of a group's productivity. I was fascinated by lore as a form of serial storytelling because of the great breadth of story it could tell. Its flexibility is really necessitated by the fact that lore gets carried out across multiple music videos over the years. And that means that there's this necessary interplay between a stable center and expansive possibility, always held together by the core of the group members themselves and their sound. That interplay between continuity and difference is a form of, well, essentially narrative complexity, involving music videos and trailers and the music itself, and sometimes even the merchandising as part of the story world. On top of that, a single group can have multiple lores at once, as I sort of referenced with Oneus and the shift to mermaids. So basically, what I was getting out of all of this was that there were wonderful extended stories, and that K-pop was using the transmedia nature of the music industry as form and fuel for storytelling. I started seeking out groups who had extensive lore and lots of fan creation, where fans theorized on that lore. I had been especially struck by the Oneus and Gfriend lore because of the way they created these alternate iterations that could exist in the given moment, but in really different ways. Because for Oneus, there's all these different variations of the vampires you can visit, but for Gfriend, it was really an extended serial narrative that depended on notions of the butterfly effect in the multiverse. But in both cases, they used the narrative and philosophical construct of the multiverse to create their narrative complexity, essentially, and I loved that about them. So then I started looking specifically for that use of the multiverse in K-pop lore, and there were two incredibly notable examples in the last couple of years that just completely fascinated me and that I want to unpack now. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, Stray Kids. So in October of 2023, Stray Kids released a song that was literally entitled Megaverse. Now, I knew a little about Stray Kids lore at this point because it was something people talked about with a passion. Stray Kids have a passionate fandom called Stay, and my understanding, or it was a bit of a misunderstanding as it turns out, of Stray Kids lore was that it was sort of a Peter Pan-ish narrative of a group of lost boys coming together to search out things on an island. That's more Tomorrow by Together's lore, as it turns out. But I did know, just from seeing various comments and the like, that there were different versions of the characters and members, and that there was some dimension of alternate universe or gameplay or something going on. So I came in a sense, not at the end of the story, but very far into the story, and watched Megaverse with total fascination, as it depicted multiple iterations of the Stray Kids, coming together and threatening to take over the world, essentially from the point of view of some kind of guard at an institution who witnesses all of these different Stray Kids converging on the surveillance camera.
Run along with the gods, jumping between every verse, the multiverse, and ready for our universe. First, second, third, fourth wall, we're breaking them all, unbeatable score. Our composition brings a competition, but we've already won in this Megaverse.
And this blew my mind. I love the meta-ness of it. I love the invocation of fandom as an extension of Stray Kids. This sort of multiplicity of Stray Kids fans and Stray Kids everywhere, since their tagline is, "You make Stray Kids stay," suggesting that fans are the ones who bring the Stray Kids together into the universe, or bring the multiplicity of the Stray Kids into the universe. So I decided to go back to the beginning to understand the lore of Stray Kids and see how we got to this place of overt and direct reference to what they term a megaverse. And what I found is not dissimilar from both Oneus and Gfriend. We have this multiplicity of music videos, linked often by a theme, as well as by telling an unfolding narrative. The theme being finding one's voice in the face of societal opposition and restriction. The narrative being that of potentially being clones in an institution, breaking away, possibly switching with one another to find their right universes that they feel they belong in, and playing out different forms of tension across these different instances of themselves within different societal contexts, but all colored by the desire to find and be oneself in the face of various degrees of dystopian restrictive societies that don't allow self-expression and don't prioritize self-understanding. For Stray Kids, I saw how clearly the lore and the use of alternative universes or the multiverse, or as they term it, the megaverse, enables this extensive engagement or doubling and tripling down on the themes that seem to matter so much in Stray Kids' music and their transmedia universe. Finally, I'm going to conclude with a group you may not expect me to talk about in terms of lore and the multiverse. Indeed, at first, I thought they didn't have any extended lore at all, and that is New Jeans. So when New Jeans came on the scene in 2022, they seemed like this innocent, fresh new take on a K-pop girl group. Two of their first music videos, Attention and Hype Boy, appeared to be self-contained stories rather than a larger story yet to unfold. But Attention and Hype Boy each had multiple versions, and through these versions we got a sense that something interesting was happening narratively. They offered a multiplicity of perspectives and different iterations of each story. This unfolding of multiple perspectives has since become a recognizable staple of New Jeans storytelling. But it really was with their first comeback, with Ditto, that I began to sense more of an extensive lore potential for New Jeans. Ditto told a story that seemed again to be self-enclosed, this time of a main character who wasn't any of the members, Ban Hee-soo, who we see hanging out with her friends, the New Jeans members. As the first version of the music video unfolds, we start to ask whether her friends were ever there. The music video invites us to ask whether perhaps she may have been imagining them, or if something happened to them and she's refusing to accept their absence or death. This is made even clearer in the second version of the music video, where we see footage of Ban Hee-soo as an adult, watching old videos of her with her friends. There's all sorts of story clues and hints here, inviting you to drill down into what happened. And not only that, there's also all kinds of transmedia extensions, most especially Ban Hee-soo's YouTube account, where you can see videos that she shot with her friends. And so it becomes a kind of alternate reality game, a mystery, where we ask questions along the lines of, are these girls together as friends? Did they ever even exist? Thus, Ditto and its transmedia universe introduces multiple potential storylines and leaves some questions as to which storyline is the truth. And this uncertainty was perhaps the most unsettling thing of all about it. Ditto was a huge hit, and I would say significantly changed the face of K-pop storytelling, as much as New Jeans' style impacted musically and aesthetically a lot of what was going on in K-pop at the time. With their next video, OMG, things got even more complicated, because although a seemingly fun and lighthearted song, the music video depicts the girls in a psychiatric institution in which they have various delusions. Hani thinks she's an iPhone, and Danielle desperately tries to convince the other members or fellow psychiatric inmates that they're actually idols in a K-pop group and are shooting a music video right now. I absolutely love this moment because it makes explicit what I was talking about in relation to Oneus, this notion that somehow lore introduces a multiplicity of storylines in which we might be in one of them as the viewers, where our existence and experience of the idols as idols could be just one of the many variations of existence. We just happen to be in the one where they're K-pop idols. And this is especially driven home when the members absolutely dismiss Danielle's insistence, even though we see them shooting a music video and we're watching the music video that they shot. It's left unresolved within OMG which reality is the truth. And I feel underlying this that there's a rejection of rationality and of a singular truth, and a celebration of all of the creative possibilities and imagination of the girls. And this is driven home by all the performance videos for OMG, which show them celebrating as a group of friends and even as fans together outside of the asylum with pure, unadulterated joy. And for me, this is driven home even more when we look at all of the videos made by fans videos, the cover dance videos, where they enact these performances and dance moves that are meant to represent the supposed insanity of love or fanishness. And they do it in all sorts of different spaces and countries, full of the iconic signifiers of different nations and cultures. But I think that is worthy of looking at more deeply at another time. It's actually maybe ironically a secondary advertising-focused music video, a music video that's essentially an advertisement for Coke Zero called Zero, where we see the alternate universe multiverse potential narrative of the New Jeans lore spelled out directly. This extra textual merchandising segment suggests that all of the New Jeans storylines could exist together and could also potentially be united. In this video, we see the members of New Jeans trapped in different universes, but able to come together through a red door that appears via one of their drawings. Like in OMG, it's the power of their imagination that can unite them. We also see glimpses of an answer to the mystery of what happened in Ditto, as we see a bus crash that suggests that at least some of the members were killed in Ditto, and that's what resulted in Bon Hee-soo's cast, where she was the only one to survive that bus crash. But here, despite the bus crash, they can come together again from all of the universes through the power of imagination, linked through the red door. Thus, New Jeans lore offers the pleasures of unification and the multiplicity of all of the possible different stories all existing at once, but also coming together through their and our creativity and imagination. And I think that's the power of lore in general, and also speaks to the way that we engage, the way fans have always engaged with media by imagining different potential story worlds as fan fiction, but allowing them to coexist, not needing to choose one as priority over the others. But here, that decentralization of the storyline offered by the multiverse is made manifest in both official and fan engagement, and in the union between the two. And I think that's super fascinating and super beautiful.